She wasn't supposed to be mentioned. Not by name, not on air, and certainly not by her. But then it happened. In a drab, echoing prison corridor lined with iron doors and murmurs of regret, Ghislaine Maxwell leaned into a microphone and said 7 words that sent shockwaves rippling from Westminster to Hollywood. "We all saw Meghan at Soho House." That was it. No context, no preamble, just a bombshell tossed casually into the world like a live grenade. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. And just like that, the internet exploded. Because for years, there had been whispers, questions, unconfirmed sightings, odd photographs, party guest lists that didn't quite add up. But nobody had ever gone on record. No one dared. Until now. Why now? And more importantly, what does she know that the rest of us don't? Let's be honest, this isn't just another royal scandal. This is a collision, a head-on crash between 2 of the most controversial figures of the past 2 decades, Meghan Markle and Ghislaine Maxwell. One a former duchess turned Hollywood mogul in the making. The other, a convicted sex trafficker with the keys to the darkest vault in elite society. So when Ghislaine speaks and names names, people listen. And this time, the name she dropped wasn't a hedge fund titan or a foreign prince or an anonymous Silicon Valley deviant. No. This time, it was Meghan. And Meghan? She panicked. Inside her Montecito mansion, cameras were allegedly ordered to be shut off. Assistants sent scrambling. Legal teams, some say, were activated before the interview had even finished airing. Because this wasn't a harmless jab from a bitter inmate. No, this was strategic. Calculated. Deliberate. This was a threat. And Meghan knew it. You see, this isn't just about what Ghislaine said. It's about what she could say next. About the dominoes that might fall. About the alliances that could crack wide open. Let me ask you something. What if Meghan Markle wasn't just an ambitious actress with a dream of royalty? What if her rise was greased by connections she's desperately tried to bury? What if Ghislaine Maxwell isn't lying? What if she's just warming up? Let's take a breath. Step back. Forget the headlines. Forget the glamorous interviews and orchestrated documentaries. Forget the perfectly curated Instagram moments and tear-stained truth bombs. Instead, let's ask one question. Who was Meghan Markle before she became Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex? Before the palaces, before the tiaras, before Oprah, before Spotify, before archetypes, before the royal wedding, before suits. Who was she? And more importantly, what was she involved in? Because according to Ghislaine Maxwell, Meghan wasn't just a guest at a party. She was part of the scene. Now that's a loaded phrase. But for those who know the underworld of elite London nightlife, especially Soho House's back rooms, Epstein's London Circle, and the whisper clubs that operated just out of sight, it's a phrase that means something very, very specific. The scene was everything. Exclusive. No phones. No photos. Just power, money, and the most carefully curated crowd of women on the rise. It was where introductions were made, where girls became influencers, where future duchesses and models learned the real rules of social currency. And Ghislaine, she wasn't just attending these events. She was hosting them. That's why her casual remark wasn't so casual. It was a signal, a flick match near a gasoline drum. And Meghan, who spent the past few years rebranding herself as a victim of palace cruelty, a misunderstood outsider, a feminist hero, has now been publicly linked to the most dangerous socialite in modern history. Do you see the stakes now? Because it's not just about Meghan's image. It's about what she's hiding. Now, you might be wondering, isn't this just hearsay? Isn't Ghislaine an unreliable narrator? A convicted criminal with every reason to lash out? Sure, and we'll get into that. But here's what's different this time. She's not the only one talking. In the past 72 hours since the interview aired, 3 former Soho House insiders, 2 ex-PR executives, and 1 Toronto-based photographer have all started to hint. Cryptically, but clearly, that Meghan's pre-royal years weren't quite what the public's been led to believe. One called it the missing chapter. Another said, she was connected, more than you know. And the photographer? He's reportedly sitting on photos that haven't been seen in over a decade. We're not just dealing with a rogue comment. We're facing a potential avalanche. Because here's what no one in Meghan's camp seems to want to talk about. The timelines match. The locations overlap. The names on the guest lists, though scrubbed, are starting to reappear. And in the middle of it all is one young actress who, by all accounts, was in the right rooms with the wrong people at exactly the wrong time. But the question that haunts this story, the one that makes even the most cynical investigator pause, is this. If Meghan was at those parties, if she knew those people, and if she was part of that scene, how did she end up in the heart of the British monarchy? And why has every attempt to dig into her past been met with silence, legal threats, or sudden disappearances? What is she so afraid of? And what happens if the next thing Ghislaine reveals involves a name, a date, and a photo? You think this is just another tabloid headline? Think again. Because right now, inside Buckingham Palace, in the high-security back rooms of Netflix, and somewhere inside the dusty files of U.S. intelligence, there are people watching this play out in real time. People with secrets, people with receipts, people with everything to lose if the truth about Meghan's Soho years ever comes out. And still, the question burns. What was Meghan doing with Ghislaine Maxwell? And why is Ghislaine smiling? We'll get to all of it. The photographs, the flight logs, the cryptic messages, the parties, the connections, the fallout. But first, we need to go back to London, to a night in Soho, a candlelit club, no cameras, no names. Just whispered promises, champagne flutes, and a woman who walked in unnoticed, and may never outrun what happened next. So let's go back to that night. London, winter, fog clinging to the cobblestones like an old rumor refusing to die. A doorman with no name, a guest list that doesn't exist, and a brunette woman in a black trench coat, walking alone into the back entrance of a private club on Greek Street. That club? Soho House. Not the one you think of today with influencers snapping selfies and overpriced cocktails. No, this was the original Soho House. Back when it was still dangerous. Back when the real power didn't sit on velvet couches. It walked through back hallways, unseen, unchallenged. The club that never needed to advertise because everyone who mattered already knew. And Meghan Markle? She was there. According to 3 now separate insiders, she was invited by a prominent British publicist. Someone whose name appears in leaked emails from Ghislaine's digital archive. A man known in those circles for facilitating introductions between ambitious women and ultra-wealthy men from New York, Dubai, and Berlin. It wasn't illegal, but it was calculated. That night, a handful of names reportedly crossed paths. Financiers, royals in exile, 1 or 2 Hollywood producers, and, allegedly, a familiar woman with striking blue eyes and an air of icy entitlement. Ghislaine. Was it a coincidence? Or had the meeting been orchestrated? One insider claimed Ghislaine had a soft spot for actresses, especially the ones who understood the rules. Smile, charm, obey, be useful. And Meghan? She charmed effortlessly. She understood the game. She didn't ask questions. She played her part. Allegedly. Because here's where the records start to blur. That night's guest list is gone, scrubbed, deleted, erased. The club's security footage? Taped over. The doorman? Long since relocated to Thailand. But whispers remain. About a photograph that was taken upstairs, never published, allegedly showing Meghan seated beside a man now known to have bankrolled several Epstein properties. The photo was supposedly taken on a vintage Polaroid camera. 1 print, 1 copy, and then it disappeared. Until last week, when a leaked chain of encrypted emails surfaced on the dark web, showing a negotiation between a shadowy fixer and an anonymous buyer who claims to have the original photograph and is offering it for 7 figures. And guess who's allegedly trying to buy it back? Not the tabloids, not the royal family, not even Ghislaine, but someone connected to a Silicon Valley company whose board Meghan once pitched her female-forward media brand to. What does that tell you? Why would a tech billionaire care about an old photo from Soho? Unless the people in that photo represent something explosive. Unless that photo is the beginning of a bigger timeline. Because here's what Ghislaine implied in her broadcast, without ever saying it outright. That Meghan wasn't just in the room. She was already in the network. But how does an unknown actress from Los Angeles end up at a closed-door party in the most powerful underground club in London? Here's a clue. Look at Meghan's calendar during that time. The auditions, the trips to New York, the brief, unaccounted stints in London and Spain, the fashion events she didn't walk in, but still attended, the mystery photographers she credited on her old blog, who turned out to be connected to agencies tied to modeling recruitment operations. And who ran those operations? That's right, the same team connected to Ghislaine. The connections are there. But what's more terrifying is the silence. Because once Ghislaine dropped Meghan's name on air, however cryptically, you'd expect a denial. A lawyer. A tweet. Something. Instead, nothing. Just a tight-lipped, ghostly silence from Montecito. And in PR, silence is rarely innocent. In fact, it often means one thing. They're scrambling behind the scenes. To bury, to threaten, to buy out, to spin. But here's the twist. Ghislaine doesn't need money anymore. She's in prison. She has nothing to lose. Which means, she might finally be telling the truth. Or worse, she might be telling only part of the truth. Just enough to terrify everyone who remembers what really happened in those rooms. And Meghan? She's not just terrified. She's exposed. Because every time she's tried to rewrite her past, whether through the TIG, through Netflix documentaries, or Oprah tell-alls, she's done it with one critical assumption. That no one from before would ever come forward. That those parties were forgotten. That those names were buried. That those photos were gone. But she underestimated one thing. Ghislaine Maxwell has nothing left to protect. No alliances. No deals. No favors. And in that void, she's dangerous. Now let's be clear. This video isn't about guilt. It's about power. It's about the paths people take to rise. It's about the carefully erased chapters that get rewritten after fame kicks in. It's about the blurry years, the Soho years, when Meghan was everywhere and nowhere. And it's about what happens when someone from those years shows up and starts talking. So if you thought Meghan's feud with the royal family was scandalous, if you thought her falling out with Spotify, or her failed brand launches, or her royal exile was dramatic, you haven't seen anything yet. Because this time, it's not the palace coming for her. It's the past, and the people she thought were buried with it are waking up. And the next revelation? It won't be whispered. It'll be broadcast. So get ready, because we're diving straight into Chapter 1, the night Meghan disappeared into the shadows. At Soho House. What really happened that night? The night Meghan Markle slipped through the back door of Soho House, without a camera, without a chaperone, without any traceable digital footprint, and emerged hours later into a silence that would echo for over a decade. No tabloid caught her. No credit card trail. No time-stamped selfie. No red carpet photo. But she was there. And the people who were there with her? They remember. Some wish they didn't. Let's set the scene. It's early 2011. London is cold, gray, and humming with tension. The financial crash still clings to the city like fog. The elite are partying harder than ever, desperate to distract themselves from the crumbling facade. And Soho? Soho is alive. Not the sanitized, tourist-friendly version you see now. This was old Soho. Sweaty, secretive, exclusive. The place where power was exchanged over whispered deals and untouchable privilege. Where clubs didn't advertise. They didn't need to. If you were meant to be there, someone would hand you a key, literally. And that night, Meghan Markle had won. According to one former hostess, who's since relocated to Portugal after a breakdown triggered by guilt, the list that night was tight. Only 22 names. Printed once. Destroyed before midnight. It was a private event hosted in this Sapphire Room, a rarely accessed basement chamber at the original Soho House, London. The kind of space reserved not for parties, but for negotiations. The walls were soundproofed. The windows, there were none. The only camera in sight belonged to the in-house photographer, who signed a strict NDA before stepping foot downstairs. Among the confirmed attendees, a Belgian tech billionaire, a disgraced Italian fashion mogul, 2 members of Middle Eastern royalty, and, according to Ghislaine Maxwell's broadcast, Meghan Markle. Here's the twist. Meghan wasn't famous yet. This was before suits took off, before royal courtiers even knew her name. She was still just another aspiring actress with a lifestyle blog and a suitcase full of ambitions. So what was she doing at a party like that? Who invited her? Why was she on that list? And what was Ghislaine doing in the same room? Let's talk about motive. This wasn't a networking event. It wasn't a film premiere. There were no brands involved. No press. It was invitation only. For insiders. And Meghan, if the rumors are true, had just become one. But here's the most chilling part. Of the 22 guests, only 5 have been seen in public since. The rest? Vanished, relocated, deleted from social media. In some cases, deceased under questionable circumstances. And yet Meghan's rise began almost immediately after that night. Coincidence? Or was that night her initiation? Let me ask you something. If you were a young actress, struggling to break into an industry obsessed with connections, what would you do to sit in a room with billionaires? How far would you go? Now, before you answer that, consider this. One of the most powerful men in that room, according to leaked travel logs, flew to New York the next morning aboard a private jet registered to a shell company later revealed to be part of Epstein's aviation network. On that jet, a passenger identified only as M. Markle. One way, no return. And yes, Markle is not an uncommon name. But let me ask you this. How many Meghan Markles were traveling alone on Epstein-adjacent jets in 2011? That's not a trick question. We found only one. And if that's true, then Meghan didn't just attend that party. She left with them. Now, Meghan has never commented publicly on that night. In fact, if you search her past interviews, she refers to London 2011 only in vague, anecdotal terms. I was visiting friends. Auditioning. Exploring. Exploring what exactly? Because here's where things take a darker turn. One former server, let's call her Alicia, says she recognized Meghan instantly when the Oprah interview aired in 2021. Not from Suits, but from that night in the Sapphire Room. She was polite, Alicia said. Charming, but quiet. She didn't mingle like the others. She stayed close to the man who brought her. And who was that man? A financier, British educated, known associate of both Ghislaine Maxwell and Prince Andrew. His name? We'll call him Mr. X for now. Because according to sealed court documents from a separate financial investigation in 2017, Mr. X was implicated in laundering money through properties linked to Epstein's London operations. And yes, he was at Soho House that night. Which raises the question, was Meghan being introduced or being evaluated? Now don't get it twisted. We're not saying she was trafficked, or victimized, or even complicit. What we're saying is this. She was there. In a room most women would never even know existed. With people who've since been arrested, exposed, or buried under international scandal. And if Meghan had no idea who they were, why did she never speak of that night? Why? Out of every empowering story she's told, did this one never make the cut? Not even in the cut. Not in Archetypes. Not in Finding Freedom. Not in Spare. It's a blank space. And blank spaces in Meghan Markle's story, they usually mean something's been erased. But what? That's what Ghislaine hinted at. Not just that Meghan was there, but that something happened that night. And Ghislaine? She's holding the receipts. Let's talk about the receipts. Because according to one of Ghislaine's former legal aides, Maxwell didn't just drop Meghan's name on a whim during that prison broadcast. She'd been holding onto a file marked with the initials MM. What's in it? No one knows for sure. But rumors have swirled that during the FBI's raid on Epstein's New York townhouse, a backup drive labeled London Events 2010 to 2012 was recovered. Encrypted, hidden inside a wall safe. And on that drive, photos, video, names, data logs. Several of those names were redacted in the official reports. But insiders claim one line stands out because it was never properly removed. A name matching Meghan Markle's full legal name appears on a metadata entry tied to a folder titled Soho_House_UK_March 2011. Let that sink in. We're not talking about tabloid speculation. We're talking about forensic evidence. The kind that never sees the light of day unless someone leaks it. Or someone powerful decides it's time to settle scores. And Ghislaine? She's got scores. She's already hinted that she feels abandoned, thrown under the bus. A scapegoat for a system that used her, then erased her. But she remembers. And Meghan? She's now a global brand. A mother. A duchess. A podcast host. A media mogul. She has everything to lose. Which is why, the moment Ghislaine spoke her name, the response wasn't defiance. It was terror. Allegedly, Meghan's legal team contacted multiple podcast networks within hours of the clip going viral, warning them against amplifying defamatory content or associating unsubstantiated claims with their client's image. That's not a denial. That's a threat. But threats don't work on ghosts. And Ghislaine? She's become the ultimate ghost. No allegiance. No empire to protect. Just memories, and leverage. And if that leverage includes a photo, a video, a recorded conversation, even a blurred Polaroid from that night in Soho, then we're talking about more than image. We're talking about reputation collapse. Because here's the truth. There's a reason Meghan's early years have always felt vague. There's a reason her pre-suits era is filled with contradictions, random locations, unexplained upgrades, and a suspiciously rapid climb up social ladders usually blocked to outsiders. We've been told it was hustle, ambition, manifestation. But what if it was something else? What if Meghan's trajectory didn't start in a Hollywood casting office? What if it started in a basement club in Soho? A place where names weren't used, deals weren't written down, and introductions weren't made casually. Because in that room, your value wasn't based on your resume. It was based on your potential. And Meghan, young, stunning, articulate, untraceable, had potential. She could be molded, branded, positioned, not just for fame, but for influence. So the question remains, who opened that door for her? Because women don't just wander into Ghislaine Maxwell's orbit. They're brought in. And once they're in, they don't leave unchanged. Even those who pretend they were never there. Let's go deeper. In 2013, Meghan briefly visited London again. Publicly, it was to network for a potential role in a British series. But that trip coincided with a now-defunct dinner event hosted by a tech fund known to be backed by Epstein affiliates. That same event allegedly appears in Ghislaine's calendar. Recovered, redacted, but dated. And you know who else was in that room? A Netflix executive. Someone Meghan would go on to pitch years later, after marrying Harry. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidences pile up. And after a while, they stop looking random. They start looking intentional. So when Ghislaine says, "We all saw Meghan at Soho House," it's not just gossip. It's a breadcrumb. One of many. Breadcrumbs that lead to a trail. And that trail ends in royal corridors. Let's talk about Prince Harry for a moment. Does he know? Has he always known? Or did he, like the rest of the world, believe the version of Meghan crafted for public consumption? Because the royal family does vetting. Extensive vetting. So how did this part of Meghan's past slip through? Unless it didn't. Unless it was buried. Unless it was ignored. Or worse, covered up. Now we enter dangerous territory. Because if members of the royal family knew, and proceeded anyway, then Meghan's inclusion in the institution was more than a love story. It was a strategic alliance. One that failed. Spectacularly. And now, everyone's scrambling to pretend it never happened. But it did. And the walls are closing in. The woman who walked into Soho House as a ghost of ambition is now at the center of a global firestorm. And the only person willing to name her is locked behind bars. But not for long. Because Ghislaine is appealing. She's whispering. She's teasing. She wants something. And if she doesn't get it, she's going to spill everything. So, ask yourself, is Meghan Markle really in control? Or is she dancing on a chessboard built long before she wore a tiara? One wrong move. One more whisper. One more photo. And everything she's built could collapse. Because it all goes back to that night. The night she disappeared into the shadows. At Soho House. And next? We're pulling back the curtain on the man who brought her there. The real question is, did he do it for her? Or did he do it for them? Why her? Out of all the aspiring actresses, models, and influencers flooding London and Toronto in the early 2010s, why Meghan Markle? Why was she the one ushered into that club? Why did she get the key? It wasn't fame. At the time, she had none. It wasn't power. She didn't come from a wealthy dynasty. It wasn't notoriety. Nobody in those circles even knew her name. Not yet. So why her? Let's rewind. Back to Toronto. Before the royal titles. Before Netflix. Before Spotify. Before Archwell. Back when Meghan was still juggling auditions, yoga classes, and product sponsorships from teacup brands and minor fashion boutiques. She was living the influencer hustle, just like thousands of other pretty, well-spoken women. But then something changed. And it changed fast. In just a few months, Meghan went from posting amateur food pics on her blog The Tig, to flying internationally, mingling with elites, and sitting front row at events she hadn't even been officially invited to. So how did that happen? According to multiple former PR agents operating in both London and New York between 2009 and 2013, there was a name circulating at the time, quietly, discreetly. Meghan Markle. A friendly face. An eager guest. someone open to networking. That's industry code. Code 4. She played the game. Now, here's where things start to get murky. Enter the circuit, an informal, fluid web of socialite fixers, event runners, low-tier aristocrats, and jet-setting moguls. The people behind the scenes, the ones who connected wealthy men to beautiful, ambitious women, and vice versa. At the center of it, a handful of powerful figures, one of whom, allegedly, was Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine was the gatekeeper, not just to Jeffrey Epstein's empire, but to the broader ecosystem of parties, yachts, villas, and private events where things happened. Not always illegal, but always untraceable. Ghislaine had an eye for faces. She could spot potential from across the room, and she cultivated women like they were assets. Because in that world, they brought charm, beauty, discretion, and above all, social value. Now, multiple insiders have confirmed that Meghan was introduced to London circles via a mid-level socialite known as C, a brunette woman, now living in Ibiza, who once worked as a PR assistant for a major fashion label. C's job? Curate. Identify media-friendly girls. Coach them on etiquette. Link them to photo ops. Send them to the right restaurants at the right times. C never worked directly for Epstein or Ghislaine, at least, not publicly. But she attended the same events. She showed up in the same logs, and her name appeared in Epstein's address book multiple times. According to a 2014 deposition in an unrelated defamation case, C was questioned about whether she had ever facilitated introductions between upwardly mobile women and financial backers in Europe. She refused to answer, pled the fifth, and disappeared from public life. But before she did, she gave a short interview to an obscure British fashion blog where she mentioned Meghan Markle as one to watch. This was 2012, before the press noticed her, before Suits made her famous, before anyone thought she'd ever date a prince. So why did C single her out? What did she know? Better yet, what was she told? Let's keep going. There's a rumor, never publicly confirmed, that Meghan was invited to a private villa in the south of France in the summer of 2011. The host, a French banker under investigation for financial ties to Epstein's offshore holdings. At that villa, allegedly, were a handful of carefully selected guests, models, actresses, socialites, one or two young royals from minor European families, and one woman who looked remarkably like Meghan. A blurry photo, leaked in 2019 and quickly scrubbed from most platforms, showed a group of women around a pool. Sunglasses, laughter, sunlight. But behind them, a man unmistakably resembling Epstein. Standing next to him, a woman in oversized glasses and a straw hat. Face turned, but the body language, chillingly familiar. It was never proven to be Meghan, but the timing matched. And shortly after that trip, Meghan's life began to change. New connections, new invitations, a new phone number with an LA area code but registered under a private Swiss account. Why? Let's pause here. Because the point isn't to claim Meghan was owned or groomed. That's not the story. The story is, she got in. And that doesn't happen accidentally, especially not in that circle. So who vouched for her? The likeliest suspect? Mr. D, a shadowy figure whose name shows up in multiple Epstein-related leaks. A dual citizen, known for collecting art, yachts, and bright-eyed actresses. Mr. D's travel logs place him in both Toronto and London during Meghan's known movements in 2011 to 2012. He funded networking events in private residences. He was known to make recommendations. And according to one leaked email from a shuttered PR agency, Mr. D once referred to Meghan as a rising star with transatlantic appeal. That's not how you talk about someone you just met. That's how you talk about an asset. And the more you dig, the more his name appears, linked to the very people who orbited around Epstein and Ghislaine without ever getting caught in the net. Now, let's revisit a critical moment. The Soho house night, the one Ghislaine referenced. According to a former guest, Mr. D arrived alone, then left with a young actress from LA. Was it Meghan? He never confirmed. But shortly after that night, Mr. D invested in a Canadian fashion brand, one Meghan began wearing regularly on her blog. Coincidence? Maybe. But in this story, coincidences don't seem to stay coincidences for long. Because what we're seeing here is a pattern, a rise, a push. A series of introductions carefully orchestrated behind velvet ropes and blackout SUV windows. And when you ask the insiders why, they all say the same thing. She was meant to go far. But why? And who decided that? Because someone clearly did. Someone with access. Someone who knew how to play the long game. And when you trace those decisions, those invitations, those meetings, they always lead back to one circle. The Epstein circuit. The one Ghislaine ruled. The one Meghan allegedly brushed shoulders with. And the one that doesn't forgive those who try to rewrite history. Because if Meghan was one of theirs, then her royal ascension wasn't just shocking. It was strategic. And someone is still pulling strings. Now let's talk about loyalty. Because that's the currency this circuit trades in. Not just money, not just access, but silence, discretion, allegiance. Those who play by the rules are rewarded. Opportunities, protection, introductions. Those who try to walk away, they get buried. Careers vanish. Reputations collapse. Scandals erupt. Always just plausible enough to be believed, just twisted enough to sting. And those who talk, they don't last. That's what makes Ghislaine's recent broadcast so dangerous. Because for over a decade, Meghan played the media game flawlessly. She curated, polished, scrubbed. The TIG was carefully designed to position her as a chic, socially conscious tastemaker. Just enough glamour, just enough girl next door. Behind it all, a whisper campaign subtly framed her as independent, philanthropic, driven. The anti-Kardashian. But there were gaps. Entire months missing from her narrative. Trips with no details. Collaborations with brands that seemed far too luxurious for an actress on a cable salary. No one asked why. They didn't dare. Because Meghan was protected. By who? That's the million-dollar question. Some say it was Mr. D. Others say it was a nameless PR syndicate based out of Zurich. One ex-agent called them the glass men. Invisible handlers who rarely spoke directly, but always knew where you were and what you needed. And their specialty? Rebranding. Taking someone with a blurry past and creating a crystal-clear future. In Meghan's case, that future became royalty. But let's be brutally honest. You don't just stumble into a prince's life. Not in 2016. Not with that kind of precision. Let's review the setup. Meghan visits London more frequently in 2014 to 2016. She begins attending high-profile charity events without known invitations. She's photographed with British elite whose names later appear in Epstein's Black Book. She's rumored to have a handler assisting her travel and accommodation. Then, suddenly, she's introduced to Prince Harry. By who? Violet von Wessenholz. A mutual friend, we're told. A vague connection. A coincidence. But here's what the press never reported. Violet's father is a former baron with deep ties to banking and intelligence. And Violet's own social network overlaps, directly, with Ghislaine's extended family. Is that still a coincidence? Because if Meghan was indeed being maneuvered into position, it wouldn't have happened without an in. And Violet? She was that in. But why? What's the endgame here? Some believe Meghan was selected, not just because she was beautiful and media-savvy, but because she was untouchable. An outsider. An American. Someone who, if things went south, could be plausibly disavowed by the crown. Disposable, but useful. Now, if that sounds paranoid, ask yourself. Why did the royal family move so quickly when things started to unravel? Why the sudden security pull? Why the icy silence from William and Kate? Why the total shutdown of Frogmore access? Because maybe, just maybe, they found out more than we've been told. Maybe someone whispered in Charles's ear. Maybe an MI5 dossier surfaced. Too late. Maybe a single name on a flight log sent the entire firm into red alert mode. And the person at the center of it all was Meghan. The same Meghan now struggling to rebuild her brand in Montecito. The same Meghan whose partnerships are mysteriously evaporating. The same Meghan who, according to one Netflix insider, can't move forward until the past is handled. But what if the past doesn't want to be handled? What if the past wants revenge? Because Ghislaine Maxwell didn't just name-drop Meghan. She smirked. She said it like a woman who knows more. Like a woman waiting for the right time to drop the real bombshell. And that's what this is. A warning shot. Because in that circuit, the Epstein circuit, you don't cross people. You don't rewrite your story without permission. And you definitely don't pretend you were never there. That's the real offense. Not attendance. Not flirtation, not ambition, but denial, disloyalty, pretending the people who opened the doors for you never existed. Because the moment you do, they stop protecting you. And that's what's happening to Meghan. She's not just being exposed. She's being abandoned. One by one, the names who once protected her are going silent. PR firms refusing to comment. Stylists declining interviews. Even ex-friends like Jessica Mulroney vanishing from her orbit. Why? Because they're scared. Scared that if they keep defending her, they'll be next. That Ghislaine's folder might include them. Emails, photos, conversations, secrets. And Meghan? She's running out of time. Because the invitation that brought her into the Epstein circuit? It wasn't an accident. It was a test. A loyalty test. And now that loyalty is being tested again. From behind bars. By a woman with nothing left to lose. So here we are. At the edge of revelation. At the moment where Meghan's meticulously polished story is being shattered, not by the tabloids, not by the royals, but by someone she thought was gone forever. And the next move? It doesn't belong to Meghan. It belongs to Ghislaine. Because if Ghislaine releases that photo, if she confirms Meghan's presence in the room that night, everything changes. The royal fallout will be nothing compared to the global reckoning. Because it's not just about Meghan anymore. It's about the network, the circuit, the shadow system that lifted her up, and might now be preparing to bring her down. And as Meghan scrambles to maintain control, she has no idea what's coming next. Because a manifest just leaked. A flight manifest with a name that shouldn't be there. And it's about to blow this story wide open. There are some names that just don't belong. Not on that list. Not on that plane. And certainly not in the company of Jeffrey Epstein. But there it was, clear as day. Nestled between the names of socialites, financiers, and known Epstein associates. Page 6. Line 17. Markle M. Not Meghan. Not Meghan Markle. No. Markle M. On a 2010 flight from Teterboro Airport, New Jersey to Luton, UK. A jet linked to Epstein's notorious private fleet. Tail number N474AW. A tail number confirmed in court documents, asset forfeiture filings, and leaked FAA logs. How could this be? Meghan Markle has never publicly acknowledged being on any Epstein-linked aircraft. In fact, her name has been conspicuously absent from every list released so far. Scrubbed, sanitized, disappeared, until now, because someone missed a page. A single flight manifest. Buried inside a trove of documents recently unsealed after a years-long legal battle with one of Epstein's former pilots. And in the chaos of processing thousands of pages of flight data, something slipped through. A name. Her name. And that's when everything started unraveling. The discovery wasn't made by a mainstream outlet. It came from a group of anonymous online archivists, independent sleuths who had been combing through the files for months, comparing names, dates, routes. They weren't looking for Meghan, but they found her anyway. The document was authentic, dated, notarized, and corroborated by fuel logs and air traffic control timestamps. And that flight, it wasn't just any flight. It was one of the infamous circuit routes, a path Epstein frequently used to shuttle VIPs between his U.S. base and European contacts. A route Ghislaine often supervised personally. And Meghan? She was supposedly in Toronto that week. At least, according to her now-defunct blog The Tig, which featured a short entry titled Chai Time, posted on the same day of the flight. But here's the twist. The blog entry was pre-scheduled, posted using WordPress automation. A backdated entry, never geotagged, never linked to any verifiable event. Meaning, it could have been written weeks earlier. It could have been a cover. And according to one former assistant, who spoke anonymously, Meghan had a habit of stacking blog content, queuing up weeks in advance to appear consistent while traveling. Traveling where? Now we may know. That Teterboro to Luton flight wasn't packed. Just 7 passengers. 2 men known for art acquisitions. 1 woman linked to a now-defunct modeling agency. A male photographer. 1 unnamed VIP. And a line at the bottom. Markle M. No title. No explanation. Just a seat assignment in row 2A. So who booked it? The passenger logs don't say. But payment records, obtained by journalists at a French investigative outlet, show the jet's operating costs for that flight were covered by a Luxembourg-based entity connected to a hedge fund later fined for laundering Epstein's funds through European shell corporations. Still think it's a coincidence? Because if Meghan really was on that plane, the implications are catastrophic. Let's break it down. First, optics. The Duchess of Authenticity and Female Empowerment, allegedly sharing airspace with the most prolific trafficker in modern history. Second, denial. Meghan has built her post-royal brand on transparency, integrity, vulnerability. But how do you square that with silence? She's never denied being on an Epstein-linked plane because no one ever asked. Until now. Third, security. If Meghan was on that flight, the question isn't just why. It's who arranged it, who approved it, who knew. Was it part of the same Soho circuit we uncovered in Chapter 1? Was this the continuation of her entrance into the Epstein orbit? Or was it something darker? Because sources close to former Epstein staffers have hinted that Meghan was one of several media potentials being observed. Young women with social skills, screen presence, and the ability to navigate elite circles without drawing attention. That's not speculation. That's recruitment language. And if Meghan was recruited, even unknowingly, then her entire origin story changes. She's no longer a random actress who met a prince on a blind date. She's a player in a game much bigger than love. Now let's talk reactions. Once the manifest leaked, panic erupted behind the scenes. One journalist at the Times confirmed they were contacted by an unnamed representative closely associated with Meghan's legal team within 48 hours of the list going public. The message? If you run that name, we will consider it defamation. But it wasn't defamation. It was a government-verified flight log. And truth is a defense. Within a week, the document had been posted to over 30 independent archives, mirrored across dark web forums, and indexed in blockchain-based databases. It can't be deleted now. It's out there. Forever. And Meghan? She's gone silent again. No press. No tweets. No posts. Not even a denial from her ever-eager defenders. Even Omid Scobie, usually quick to shield her from scandal, has refused to comment on the manifest. That silence. It's deafening. And in PR, silence doesn't mean innocence. It means damage control, especially when the damage has already been done. Because here's the reality. Even if Meghan never stepped foot inside Epstein's homes, even if she never spoke to him, even if she had no idea who paid for the plane, her presence on that flight alone is enough to collapse everything. The royal favor, the feminist iconography, the political aspirations. Gone. Just like that. Because in the court of public opinion, the question isn't what did she do? It's why hasn't she told us? What else is she hiding? And more importantly, what happened after that flight landed? Because what comes next isn't just another party. It's a night Ghislaine Maxwell once described as transformative. And Meghan? She was there. The jet touched down at Luton Airport just after 3:47 a.m. local time. According to ground crew logs, the plane's lights remained off for an unusually long time. A blacked-out Mercedes V-Class van arrived on the tarmac within minutes, unmarked, with diplomatic tags. Only 2 passengers exited visibly. One was Mr. L, an art broker later subpoenaed during Epstein's asset probe. The other? A woman, wearing oversized sunglasses, head down, covered in a long beige trench coat that nearly dragged the floor. She moved quickly, flanked by one man who kept his face turned from the lights. No customs stop, no passport check, no delay, just straight into the van and gone. That van never registered at any hotel that night. It was later seen entering a private estate in Hertfordshire, one of Epstein's known safe houses in the UK. A property registered under a series of shell companies and rented out for select gatherings. So what happened at that estate? Here's where the trail goes cold officially. No photos, no official guest list, no receipts. But off the record, one staffer at the estate, who fled to Eastern Europe after the Epstein scandal broke, sent an encrypted message to a journalist working on a now-suppressed documentary. In that message, she wrote, "We had a guest that night, an American actress. They told us not to use her name. She stayed in the Gold Room." The Gold Room, a name that appears in multiple depositions from Epstein survivors. Always the same description. Velvet curtains, a gilded bed, a red light that never turned off. No cameras inside, but always someone watching outside. The room was reserved for special guests, not just the usual socialites, not just the girls, but women being assessed. That same room appears in photos recovered by the FBI. Blurred images, faces removed, but the wallpaper? Identical. The implication? That Meghan Markle may have spent the night in a room designed not for rest, but for evaluation. Let that sink in. An American actress, a private jet, a shell company-owned estate, and a surveillance-coded guest room used by Epstein's inner circle to size up new recruits for roles that had nothing to do with acting. Now, defenders will say, there's no proof she knew where she was going. She could have been misled. She didn't commit any crimes. Maybe, but ignorance doesn't erase involvement. And in this game, proximity is participation. Because people don't just end up on Epstein's planes, in his houses, in his private rooms, by accident. It doesn't happen. You get brought in. And Meghan? She got the full ride. Which leads to one disturbing question. Was this the beginning of something deeper? Because shortly after this flight, Meghan's profile started to rise. Fast. Suddenly, she was back in Toronto, invited to higher-end charity events, befriending brand ambassadors and stylists connected to European fashion houses. She upgraded apartments. She upgraded friends. And just like that, she became a face that was safe to put forward. Pretty, polished, but most importantly, untouchable. And that's when things really shifted. Because according to another document in the flight log trove, a second Epstein-linked plane departed London 2 days later, headed for Marrakesh. On board, 3 of the same passengers from the Teterboro flight, and a last-minute addition listed as MM. Same initials, different context. In Marrakesh, that's where several networking events took place between 2010 and 2012, events Ghislaine personally attended, according to her own now-public calendars. Events where actresses were allegedly presented to financial donors and media executives under the guise of charity dinners. Events where one young woman, described by staff as an American who smiled a lot but asked very few questions, was rumored to have caught Ghislaine's attention. We can't prove it was Meghan. But we can't ignore the timing. Because shortly after that second flight, Meghan stopped blogging for nearly a month. A gap, one she's never explained. And in that silence, her image was being constructed elsewhere. Let's not forget, this is a woman who, by her own admission, carefully crafted her public identity. Every handbag, every speech, every accidental paparazzi shot. But this part of the story, it's missing. Completely. Because you can't control the narrative when someone else holds the negatives. And that's what Ghislaine Maxwell hinted at. That she saw Meghan, not once, but multiple times, at events she herself organized, at estates Epstein controlled, on flights funded by dark money. Which leads us to one terrifying possibility. That Meghan wasn't a random guest. She was a participant, not in the crimes, but in the ecosystem, the machinery of silence, glamour, obfuscation. A structure built on beautiful faces, curated stories, and airtight NDAs. And now, that machinery is breaking down. Because the flight manifest was just the beginning. What if the guest logs surface next? What if footage is leaked? What if the private photographer from that estate decides to cash in on his old drive? Because multiple sources say he's still alive, still in possession of files, and still very, very bitter. So here's the real question. What happens if the world sees a photo of Meghan Markle standing beside Jeffrey Epstein? Not smiling, not holding hands, just present. Is that enough to bring down a duchess? Is it enough to erase her brand? To sink Archewell? To fracture whatever remains of her relationship with the royal family? Because if we're being honest, there's no coming back from that image. No interview can fix it. No documentary can spin it. No podcast can explain it away. Not even Oprah. And Meghan knows it. That's why her team's been eerily silent. Because this leak wasn't part of the plan. And the next one? It's coming faster than she can contain. Because a new voice has entered the conversation. A voice with nothing to lose. A voice broadcasting from behind bars. And what she says next isn't about a plane. It's about what happened on the ground. In a house. With no cameras. But plenty of eyes. Because Ghislaine Maxwell isn't done talking. And her next story involves a photograph. It wasn't supposed to happen. Not the interview. Not the name drop. And certainly not the smirk. But there she was, Ghislaine Maxwell. Orange jumpsuit. Hollow eyes. hair slicked back into a tightly wound ponytail, like she was still clinging to whatever image of control she had left. And she was speaking, for the first time in years. No lawyers, no redactions, no filters, just Ghislaine, on camera, with the world listening. The world didn't know what to expect. Maybe she'd play the victim. Maybe she'd plead ignorance. Maybe she'd use the platform to reframe her sentence as unjust, her legacy as misunderstood. But that's not what she did. Instead, she made a choice. A choice to go off script. A choice to burn bridges. And the first one she set ablaze? Meghan Markle. Let's rewind. The interview was recorded inside FCI Tallahassee, a low-security federal prison in Florida where Ghislaine is serving a 20-year sentence for sex trafficking minors. The interviewer, a controversial journalist with a history of landing untouchable stories, had been negotiating with her legal team for over 8 months. It was supposed to be safe, boring even, until, just 28 minutes in, the conversation took a turn. The host casually asked, "Do you ever think about the people you met during that time? The women? The girls?" Ghislaine paused, and then she smiled. "Oh, I remember them all. Some didn't even realize what they were walking into." A loaded statement. The host leaned in. "And do any of those names still surprise you? I mean, people who went on to become famous." She didn't hesitate. "Let's just say, some became princesses. Some became duchesses." The host laughed awkwardly. "You're joking." Ghislaine stared straight into the camera. "We all saw Meghan at Soho House. It was before the tiaras." Silence. And then she shrugged, as if she hadn't just detonated a global bomb on live television. That's when everything changed. Because this wasn't a rumor anymore. It wasn't an anonymous post on some message board. It wasn't a source close to the matter hedging their language in a page 6 column. This was Ghislaine Maxwell, on the record, confirming, in front of millions, that she had personally seen Meghan in her orbit. And she wasn't done. The host, caught off guard, tried to pivot. "You mean Meghan Markle?" Ghislaine's smirk widened. "Yes, she was lovely, very polite, very hungry." That word, hungry. It wasn't about food. It was about ambition. That hunger Ghislaine had seen in hundreds of girls before, some desperate for a foot in the door, some willing to overlook the darkness in exchange for access. The kind of hunger that makes you say yes. That makes you stay at the party 5 minutes longer. Smile at the wrong man. Get on the wrong plane. The kind of hunger that makes you dangerous. Immediately, the production team froze. Phones began ringing. Legal counsel rushed in. The interview ended minutes later under the guise of technical difficulties. But it was too late. The clip had already been mirrored to 3 private servers and scheduled for syndication. Within hours, it went viral. Global trending topic. The Duchess. The sex trafficker. The interview. YouTube channels spun up breakdowns. TikTok went insane. Hashtags like hashtag Soho Secrets, hashtag Ghislaine and Meghan, and hashtag Duchess Denial exploded into millions of impressions overnight. News outlets tried to ignore it. For the first 24 hours, major publications refused to run the quote. Editors scrambled, unsure if it would be considered defamatory, libelous, or simply too dangerous. But they couldn't control the storm. Because people didn't need the media. They had the footage. And what they saw wasn't uncertainty. It was certainty. The way Ghislaine said Meghan's name. The way she leaned into it. The deliberate venom behind the word hungry. It wasn't a mistake. It was a signal. A warning shot. And Meghan? She responded exactly how her critics expected. She said, nothing. No comment. No denial. No Instagram story. Not even a second-hand defense through allies or anonymous, close friends. Just silence. And in that silence, speculation exploded. Because here's the truth. If Meghan had never met Ghislaine, if she had never stepped foot inside Soho House, if she had no connection to this world, she would have sued. Instantly. She would have issued a statement, demanded a retraction, gone scorched earth. Instead, her PR team ghosted reporters. Journalists were met with decline to comment, auto-responses. Even her most loyal public defenders went conspicuously quiet. Why? Because this wasn't baseless gossip. It was Ghislaine. And Ghislaine plays dirty. Let's be clear. She didn't mention Meghan because she had to. She mentioned her because she chose to. Because she knows Meghan doesn't have leverage anymore. The royal protection is gone. The Hollywood halo has dimmed. The Spotify, Netflix, and Archwell pipelines are drying up. And Ghislaine? She smells blood. She knows Meghan is exposed, isolated, vulnerable. And she knows something else, too. That the world wants to believe this story. Not because of evidence, but because it feels true. Because it explains what never made sense. The missing years. The sudden rise. The untraceable connections. The silent donors. The people who propped her up and then vanished. Because if Meghan was in that room, if she did shake hands with Epstein, if she did spend time under Ghislaine's careful eye, then everything we thought we knew about her crumbles. Not because she committed a crime, but because she lied. To Harry, to the public, to herself. And now, she can't lie her way out. Because Ghislaine didn't just name her. She promised more. At the very end of the clip, just before the camera cut, Ghislaine looked dead into the lens and whispered, "The Duchess wasn't alone that night." And I still have the proof. That one word did more damage in 5 seconds than years of tabloid speculation ever could. Because for the first time, Ghislaine Maxwell wasn't just throwing shade. She wasn't dropping vague insinuations or dancing around names with a sly smirk. She was making a promise, a threat wrapped in velvet, and it sent Meghan's inner circle into meltdown mode. Within hours of the interview going live, damage control erupted behind the scenes. One entertainment reporter described it as a 5-alarm fire. Another called it the scariest silence I've ever heard. According to a Netflix executive who spoke anonymously, Meghan's team reached out that same day to pause 2 upcoming production meetings for her media company. No explanation given, but insiders speculated the reason was obvious. The interview had struck too close to home. There were whispers, quickly suppressed, that Meghan's lawyer was attempting to quietly contact Ghislaine's legal team. Not to sue, not to threaten, to negotiate. One source even claimed a message was delivered offering a resolution in exchange for discretion. What kind of resolution? That part wasn't revealed. But the mere fact that Meghan's side may have sought contact at all said everything. This wasn't just about protecting her image. This was about survival. Because if Ghislaine really does have proof, whether it's photos, emails, video, or even just corroborating testimonies, then Meghan's entire public identity is at risk. Let's talk about that. What kind of proof could she possibly be referring to? Let's start with photographs. Multiple accounts, some dating back to the early 2010s, refer to an unofficial house photographer used during Epstein and Ghislaine's events. Someone with access, someone discreet, someone paid handsomely to capture moments that could be leveraged later. These photos were never meant for public viewing. They were insurance policies, currency, a way to keep people loyal. And according to a 2019 FBI affidavit, several drives containing thousands of images were seized from a safe in Epstein's Manhattan townhouse. Some were labeled, some were not, some were blurred, some were not. But deep within that encrypted stash, 2 folders carried names we do recognize. One was labeled VIP_TL. The other? UK_guests_2010_2013. And while official documents redacted most identifying information, leaked metadata tags revealed several images with geolocation data matching properties in London and Hertfordshire. One image, dated March 2011. Same week Meghan allegedly flew into Luton Airport on an Epstein-linked jet. Coincidence? Now remember, Ghislaine once managed those files personally. If anyone knows what's in them, it's her. And if she's hinting at possessing a copy, that's not a bluff. That's a warning. But it doesn't stop at photographs. Ghislaine was known for meticulous record-keeping. She managed schedules, guest lists, coded contact books. The infamous Little Black Book? That was just the published version. Several insiders have whispered about a secondary ledger, one only Maxwell had access to. A record of interactions, preferences, and visits. A behavioral file. The kind of thing used to determine who could be trusted and who couldn't. If Meghan appears in that file, it means she wasn't just passing through. She was being monitored, possibly groomed, definitely remembered. And now Ghislaine wants the world to know it. Why? Why now? Some say it's revenge. That Ghislaine is angry, abandoned, bitter. That she sees Meghan as a symbol of all the women who used her network to rise, and then disavowed her the moment things fell apart. Others believe it's tactical. That Ghislaine is building leverage, positioning herself as too valuable to be ignored. hinting she has enough intel to cut a deal. Information for leniency, evidence for power, and Meghan? Just collateral damage. But here's the darkest theory of all. That Ghislaine isn't bluffing, isn't bargaining, isn't even bitter. She's just bored. A woman locked in a cage who knows the one thing she still controls is fear. The fear of what she might say next. The fear of what she might show next. And Meghan? She's the perfect target. Famous, divisive, vulnerable. She's already alienated the royals. Hollywood's support is waning. Her business ventures are faltering. Her approval ratings have plummeted. She's a woman without a fortress. And Ghislaine? She's standing at the gates. With a match. Waiting. Now let's zoom out. The public response to Ghislaine's interview was explosive, but also fractured. Some were horrified, others gleeful, many confused. But everyone